The wind howled like a wild animal as Thomas McKenna pulled his coat tighter around his shoulders. Snow whipped across his face so hard it felt like tiny needles piercing his skin. His horse, a sturdy brown mare named Belle, struggled through the deepening drifts. Each step forward seemed harder than the last. Thomas had been tracking horse thieves for 3 days now. The men had stolen 6 of his best horses from his ranch in Colorado, and he wasn't about to let them get away with it. These horses weren't just animals to him. They were his livelihood, his future. Everything he had left after losing his wife 2 years ago. The trail had led him deep into Arizona territory, into land that most white folks avoided. This was Apache country, and tensions ran high between the tribes and settlers. But Thomas had no choice. Those horses meant the difference between keeping his ranch and losing everything. The storm had come out of nowhere. One minute the sky was gray but clear. The next minute it was like someone had thrown a white blanket over the entire world. Thomas had seen plenty of snowstorms in Colorado, but nothing like this. The wind was so strong it nearly knocked him off his horse. The snow fell so thick he couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. Belle stumbled, her breathing heavy and labored. Ice hung from her nostrils and her legs shook with exhaustion. Thomas knew they had to find shelter soon, or they'd both freeze to death out here in the wilderness. That's when he spotted it, a dark shadow in the red rock cliff face ahead. A cave, it wasn't much, but it would have to do. Thomas urged Belle forward, fighting against the wind with every step. The cave entrance was just big enough for both of them to squeeze through. As they approached, Thomas noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. There was already smoke coming from inside the cave. Someone else was in there. His hand instinctively moved to the pistol on his hip. Out here, you never knew who you might run into. Could be outlaws, could be hostile Indians, could be anyone. But with the storm raging like this, he didn't have much choice. It was either share the cave or freeze to death outside. Thomas dismounted and led Belle to the cave entrance. He called out in a voice that was both cautious and respectful. "Hello in there? I've got a horse and we need shelter from this storm. I mean no harm." No answer came back, but the smoke continued to drift out of the cave. Thomas took a deep breath and stepped inside, leading Belle behind him. What he saw made him stop in his tracks. Sitting by a small fire wrapped in a worn blanket was a young Apache woman. She looked up at him with dark eyes that showed no fear, only a kind of tired resignation. Her long black hair was braided simply, and her clothes were practical, leather and cloth that had seen better days. For a moment, neither of them moved. Thomas had expected many things when he entered the cave, but not this. Not a lone woman seeking the same shelter he desperately needed. The woman spoke first in broken English mixed with words he didn't understand. "Storm bad. You stay if you want. Cave big enough." Thomas nodded slowly, grateful beyond words. "Thank you. I'm Thomas. This is Belle." He gestured to his horse, who was already moving closer to the fire's warmth. The woman didn't give her name right away. She just watched as Thomas unsaddled Belle and rubbed her down with an old blanket from his pack. He worked with gentle hands, talking softly to the animal, checking her legs for injury. "You take care of horse good," the woman observed. "She's been with me through a lot," Thomas replied. Wouldn't be right to let her suffer. Something in his tone seemed to satisfy the woman. She reached into a leather pouch and pulled out what looked like dried corn cakes. Without a word, she offered one to Thomas. He accepted it gratefully. The cake was sweet and filling, better than the hard biscuits he'd been eating for days. "This is good." "Thank you," the woman nodded. "My name is Ayana, means flower that does not die." "Ayana," Thomas repeated, trying to get the pronunciation right. "That's a beautiful name." Outside, the storm raged on. The wind screamed through the canyon and snow piled up against the cave entrance. Inside, the small fire cast dancing shadows on the red stone walls. It wasn't much, but it was warm and dry. Thomas pulled some dried beef from his pack and offered it to Ayana. She accepted it with a small nod of thanks. They ate in comfortable silence, both too tired and cold to worry about the strangeness of their situation. As the hours passed, Thomas learned that Ayana had been in the cave for 2 days already, waiting out the storm. She'd been traveling alone, heading somewhere she didn't explain. Thomas didn't push for details. Everyone had their reasons for being where they were, and it wasn't his place to pry. What struck him most was how calm she seemed. Here was a woman alone in the wilderness. sharing a cave with a complete stranger, and she showed no fear. There was a strength about her that reminded him of the mountains themselves, quiet, enduring, unshakable. As night fell, the temperature dropped even further. The fire was their lifeline, and they took turns feeding it small pieces of wood. Thomas had gathered some before the storm hit, and Ayanna had collected dried brush and pine cones. Storm will last maybe 3-4 days, Ayanna said, reading the wind patterns like a book. Sometimes storms like this, they settle in the mountains and stay. Thomas nodded. He'd come to the same conclusion. They were stuck here together until the weather cleared. Belle had settled down near the fire, her breathing steady and calm. The cave was actually quite comfortable once you got used to it. The red stone walls held the heat well, and there were natural shelves and alcoves carved by centuries of wind and water. As Thomas arranged his bedroll on the sandy floor, he thought about how strange life could be. 24 hours ago, he'd been alone on the trail, focused only on catching the men who'd stolen his horses. Now he was sharing a cave with an Apache woman who'd shown him more kindness than he'd received from most white folks in recent memory. Ayanna settled into her own sleeping area on the opposite side of the fire. The flames flickered between them, creating a warm barrier that felt more comforting than dividing. "Thomas," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the wind outside. "Yes? Thank you for being respectful. Not all men would be." Thomas understood what she meant. A lone woman, especially an Apache woman, would be vulnerable to men with bad intentions. "My mother raised me better than that," he said simply. Ayanna smiled for the first time since he'd entered the cave. It transformed her entire face, making her look younger and less guarded. "Your mother, she was a good woman." Yes, she was. Outside, the storm continued its relentless assault on the canyon. But inside the cave, two unlikely companions had found safety and perhaps the beginning of something neither of them expected. The fire crackled softly, casting warm light on the ancient stone walls while the wind sang its wild song beyond the entrance. Thomas closed his eyes and listened to the storm. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now they were safe. And sometimes, in a world as harsh and unforgiving as the frontier, that was enough. Morning came slowly to the cave, filtered through the gray light of continuing snow. Thomas woke to the sound of crackling wood and the smell of something cooking. Ayanna was already up, tending to the fire and preparing what looked like a thin soup in a small metal pot. "Good morning," Thomas said, sitting up and stretching muscles that had grown stiff from sleeping on the rocky ground. Ayanna looked over at him with those dark, serious eyes. "Storm still bad. We stay here today too." Thomas could hear the wind, still howling outside, though it seemed less fierce than the night before. Snow continued to fall steadily, and the cave entrance was nearly blocked by drifts that had piled up during the night. Belle nickered softly from her spot near the fire. Thomas got up to check on her, running his hands along her legs and back. The mare seemed in good spirits despite their unusual circumstances. "Your horse, she is strong," Ayanna observed, stirring her soup. "Mountain horse. Born in Colorado. She's seen her share of storms." Thomas pulled some oats from his saddlebags and fed them to Belle from his palm. "What are you cooking there? Smells good." Ayanna hesitated for a moment, then seemed to make a decision. "Pine needle soup. Good for sickness, good for strength." She ladled some into a small wooden bowl and offered it to him. Thomas accepted it carefully. The soup was thin and had a sharp, clean taste that reminded him of walking through pine forests. It was surprisingly good and warmed him from the inside out. "This is excellent. Thank you." They ate in companionable silence, sharing the warmth of the fire and listening to the storm outside. Thomas found himself studying Ayanna when she wasn't looking. There was something about her that puzzled him. She moved with the confidence of someone used to taking care of herself, but there was also a sadness in her eyes that spoke of recent loss. After breakfast, Ayanna stood and began gathering her few belongings. For a moment, Thomas thought she was planning to leave despite the storm. Instead, she moved to a different part of the cave and began arranging stones and pine boughs. "What are you doing?" Thomas asked. "Making better shelter. Storm will be here 2, maybe 3 more days. We need to stay warm." She gestured for him to help her. "You are strong. Help me move these rocks." Working together, they built a more efficient shelter within the cave. Ayana showed Thomas how to arrange flat stones to reflect heat from the fire back toward their sleeping areas. She wove pine boughs into thick mats that would insulate them from the cold ground and built windbreaks to block the drafts that swept in from the cave entrance. Thomas was impressed by her knowledge and skill. "Where did you learn all this?" "My grandmother. She taught me many things about living in the mountains." Ayana's voice grew quiet. "She said a woman must know how to survive alone." There was pain in those words, but Thomas didn't push for details. Instead, he focused on helping her improve their shelter. As they worked, they began to communicate more easily. Ayana's English was better than she'd initially let on, and Thomas knew a few words of Spanish that helped bridge the gaps. By midday, they had transformed the cave into a surprisingly comfortable living space. The fire now heated the area much more efficiently, and their sleeping areas were warm and dry. Belle had her own corner with good airflow but protection from drafts. "You are a good worker," Ayana said, surveying their handiwork. "Not lazy like some men," Thomas laughed. "My ranch would fall apart if I was lazy. A man alone has to do everything himself." "You live alone?" Ayana asked, settling down near the fire. "Yes. My wife died 2 years ago. Childbirth." The word still hurt to say, but Thomas found it easier to talk about with Ayana. Maybe because she was a stranger, or maybe because there was something about her that invited honesty. Ayana nodded solemnly. "Death takes who it wants. No reason, no fairness." "You sound like you know something about that." For a long moment, Ayana stared into the fire. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "My husband and son. Soldiers came to our camp 6 months ago. Said we were hiding raiders. We were not, but they did not believe." She took a shaky breath. "My husband tried to protect our boy. Both died." Thomas felt his heart clench with sympathy. "I'm sorry. That's terrible. After that, some of my people say I bring bad spirits. Say my family was cursed. So I travel alone now." Ayana wiped her eyes quickly, as if ashamed of the tears. "You're not cursed," Thomas said firmly. "Sometimes bad things just happen. Doesn't mean it's anyone's fault." Ayana looked at him with surprise, as if she hadn't expected such understanding from a white man. "You really believe this?" "I have to. Otherwise, what happened to my wife would drive me crazy trying to understand why." They sat in silence for a while, both lost in their own painful memories. Outside, the storm continued its relentless assault. But inside the cave, 2 wounded souls had found an unexpected moment of peace. As the afternoon wore on, they worked together to gather more firewood from dead branches near the cave entrance. The storm made it dangerous to venture far, but they managed to collect enough to keep the fire going through another night. Ayana taught Thomas which plants were safe to eat and which ones had medicinal properties. She showed him how to make tea from willow bark that would help with pain, and how to identify herbs that could settle an upset stomach or help with fever. "My grandmother, she was medicine woman," Ayana explained, as they sorted through the plants they'd gathered. She knew every plant in the mountains, what it was good for, how to use it. "Is she still alive?" Thomas asked. "Yes, but she is old now. Lives with my cousin's family. They take care of her." Ayana's voice grew wistful. "She wanted me to stay with them, but I could not. Too many sad memories." Thomas understood that feeling. His own ranch was full of memories of his wife, but he couldn't bear to leave it. It was all he had left of the life they'd planned together. As evening approached, they prepared another meal together. Thomas contributed the last of his dried beef, while Ayana made a kind of bread from ground acorns she'd been carrying. The combination was simple but satisfying. "Tomorrow," Ayana said as they ate, "if storm is less, we try to get more food. There are roots we can dig even in snow. And maybe we find rabbit tracks." Thomas nodded. He'd brought enough supplies for a few days, but not for an extended stay. "You're good at this. Surviving, I mean. Taking care of yourself." Had to learn fast after. She trailed off, but Thomas understood. Well, I'm grateful you're here. I would have made it through the storm alone, but it wouldn't have been nearly as comfortable. Ayanna smiled, and again Thomas was struck by how it transformed her face. Strange how life brings people together. Storm drives us both to same cave, same time. Maybe it's not so strange, Thomas said thoughtfully. Maybe we both needed to find this place, find each other. Ayanna looked at him curiously. You think spirits guide such things? I don't know about spirits, but I know that meeting you here, sharing this time. It's the first peace I've felt since my wife died. The honesty of his words surprised them both. They looked at each other across the firelight, and something passed between them. An understanding, a recognition of shared pain and unexpected comfort. Outside, the wind continued to howl, but its voice seemed less threatening now. They had shelter, they had warmth, and they had each other's company. For two people who had been alone with their grief for so long, it was more than either had dared to hope for. As they settled in for their second night together, Thomas realized that whatever happened when the storm ended, this time in the cave had already changed something inside him. The constant ache of loneliness that had been his companion for 2 years felt lighter somehow. And looking at Ayanna as she banked the fire for the night, he could see that perhaps she felt the same way. The third day dawned with a different quality to the light filtering into the cave. The wind had died down to a steady whisper instead of the howling monster it had been. Thomas woke to find Ayanna already up, standing at the cave entrance and studying the sky. Storm is breaking, she said without turning around, but not finished yet. One more day, maybe 2. Thomas joined her at the entrance. The snow was still falling but lighter now, and he could see farther than he had since the storm began. The world outside was transformed into something from a dream. Everything covered in pristine white, the red rocks capped with snow like sleeping giants. It's beautiful, he said softly. Yes, but dangerous too. Snow is very deep now, hard to travel. Ayanna pointed to where they could see the tops of bushes poking through the drifts. Maybe 4 feet deep, maybe more. Thomas whistled low. That much snow would make travel nearly impossible. Even after the storm ended completely, they might be stuck here longer than either of them had planned. Do you need to be somewhere? He asked. People expecting you? Ayanna shook her head. No, you? Just my ranch and it can wait. My neighbor checks on things when I'm gone. Thomas paused. Guess we're not going anywhere for a while. Instead of seeming concerned, Ayanna actually looked relieved. Thomas wondered if she was dreading returning to wherever she'd been going as much as he was dreading going back to his empty ranch. After breakfast, they decided to venture outside the cave to gather more supplies. The snow had stopped falling temporarily, and they needed to take advantage of the break. Thomas bundled up in his heavy coat while Ayanna wrapped herself in a thick blanket that she secured with a leather belt. Stay close, she warned, as they stepped out into the white world. Easy to get lost in snow like this, even close to cave. The snow was indeed deep, coming up past Thomas's knees in most places. They stayed within sight of the cave, but even that short distance felt like an adventure. Ayanna showed Thomas how to read the subtle signs that indicated where useful plants might be buried beneath the snow. See there? She pointed to a slight depression in the snow. Water runs there when no snow. Good plants grow by water. They dug carefully with their hands and the few tools they had, finding edible roots and tubers that would supplement their dwindling food supplies. Ayanna also gathered bark from certain trees, explaining that it could be ground up and mixed with their other food to make it more filling. Working together in the snow, they developed an easy rhythm. Thomas used his strength to move heavy branches and dig in the deeper snow, while Ayanna's knowledge guided them to the best spots. They barely spoke, but their cooperation was seamless. When they returned to the cave, both were cold and wet but in good spirits. They'd gathered enough food to last several more days, and the work had given them a sense of accomplishment. We make good team, Ayanna said as they sorted their gathered supplies by the fire. Yes, we do, Thomas agreed. You know so much about living out here. How did you learn all this? My people, we live with the land, not against it. My grandmother taught me. Her grandmother taught her. Knowledge passed down through mothers and daughters for many generations. Thomas was fascinated. His own way of life was so different, forcing the land to produce what he wanted, fighting against nature instead of working with it. Would you teach me more? I mean, while we're stuck here anyway. Ayana looked surprised, then pleased. You really want to learn? Yes, this knowledge could save a man's life out here. So Ayana became his teacher. She showed him how to make snares from thin strips of leather that could catch small animals. She taught him to read weather signs in the clouds and wind patterns, knowledge that could predict storms hours or even days in advance. See how clouds move? She said, pointing toward the cave entrance where they could see the sky. When they come from the west like that, spinning, more snow comes soon. But when they are straight and fast, storm is ending. Thomas absorbed every lesson eagerly. He'd always been good at learning practical skills, and Ayana was a patient teacher. She didn't make him feel ignorant when he made mistakes, just showed him the right way and let him try again. In return, Thomas taught her things too. He showed her how to care for horses, how to read their moods and needs. He demonstrated techniques for preserving meat and traveling efficiently over long distances. Your horse, she trusts you completely, Ayana observed as Thomas checked Belle's hooves for ice. Animals know when person has good heart. Belle and I have been through a lot together. She's more like a partner than a possession. Ayana nodded approvingly. This is a good way to think. My people believe animals are brothers and sisters, not things to own. As the day wore on, their conversation flowed more easily. They talked about their different ways of life, their beliefs, their experiences. Thomas found himself fascinated by Ayana's perspective on the world. She saw connections and meanings in things he'd never noticed before. Everything is connected, she explained as they watched the fire dance. The stones, the trees, the animals, the people. What happens to one affects all the others. That's a beautiful way to look at things, Thomas said. Sometimes I feel like I'm completely alone in the world. But if everything is connected, then you are never truly alone. Ayana finished softly. Their eyes met across the fire, and Thomas felt something shift inside his chest. This woman, who should have been a stranger from a completely different world, understood things about life and loss that his own people had never grasped. As evening approached, the snow began falling again, heavier than before. They were definitely spending another night in the cave, but Thomas found he didn't mind. In fact, he was beginning to dread the thought of the storm ending and having to leave this peaceful sanctuary. Ayana, he said as they prepared their evening meal, can I ask you something personal? She looked up from the roots she was preparing. Yes. Before your husband and son died, were you happy? I mean, really happy. She considered the question seriously. Yes, very happy. My husband, he was kind man. Good father. We had little house by the river, horses, good life. Her voice grew wistful. We talked about having more children, maybe daughter. He wanted to teach son to be great hunter like his father. It sounds perfect, it was. That is why losing it hurts so much. She looked at Thomas intently. What about you? Were you happy with your wife? Thomas smiled, thinking back to those earlier days. Yes, we had big plans. Going to build the ranch into something special, raise horses and cattle, maybe have 4 or 5 children running around. She had it all figured out, where we'd put the bigger house, how we'd expand the pastures. She sounds like she was a strong woman. She was, stronger than me in a lot of ways. When she died, Thomas struggled for the words. It was like someone had blown out all the lights in my life. I couldn't see the point of anything anymore. They sat quietly for a moment, both lost in memories of happier times. The fire crackled softly between them, and the snow continued to fall outside their shelter. Thomas, Ayana said finally, do you think it is possible to be happy again after losing everything? It was a question that had haunted him for 2 years. I didn't think so. Still not sure. But being here with you, it's the first time I've felt like maybe there could be light again. Ayana's eyes brightened. Yes, I feel this too. Like maybe the spirits have not forgotten us completely. As they settled in for the night, Thomas reflected on how much his life had changed in just 3 days. He'd entered this cave as a bitter, lonely man focused only on recovering his stolen horses. Now he felt more alive and hopeful than he had since his wife's death. Looking at Ayana as she banked the fire, he realized that whatever happened when they finally left this place, he would never be quite the same man who had stumbled in from the storm. And somehow that felt like the beginning of something new rather than the end of something old. On the 4th morning, Thomas woke with a fever. The chill that had been creeping up his spine the night before had blossomed into full sickness. His head pounded, his throat felt raw, and his body ached as if he'd been trampled by his own horses. Ayana noticed immediately. You are sick. she said, placing a cool hand on his burning forehead. The wet clothes yesterday, the cold. This happens sometimes. Thomas tried to sit up but felt dizzy. I'll be fine. Just need to rest a bit. No, you need medicine. Real medicine. Ayanna was already moving around the cave, gathering items from her leather pouches. My grandmother taught me. I can help. Despite his protests, Ayanna insisted on treating his illness the traditional way. She brewed a bitter tea from willow bark that helped with the fever and pain. She made poultices from moss and herbs that she placed on his chest to help him breathe easier. Most importantly, she made him rest. In my tribe, when someone is sick, the whole family takes care of them, she explained as she fed him small sips of healing tea. You have no family here, so I am your family. The simple kindness of those words hit Thomas harder than the fever. No one had taken care of him like this since his wife died. He'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone worry about his well-being, to fuss over him when he was unwell. As the fever made him drowsy, Ayanna told him stories to help pass the time. She spoke of her childhood, growing up in the mountains with her grandmother's guidance. She told him about the legends of her people, stories of great warriors, wise women, and the spirits that lived in the rocks and trees. My grandmother used to say that every rock has a story, Ayanna said softly, as Thomas drifted in and out of sleep. Some are young rocks just learning about the world. Others are ancient, full of wisdom from watching the earth change. What kind of rock would I be? Thomas asked, his voice hoarse. Ayanna smiled. You would be a steady rock. Strong, reliable. The kind that others can lean on when the storms come. Thomas found comfort in her stories and her gentle care. When the fever was at its worst, she stayed by his side, cooling his forehead with snow wrapped in cloth and making sure he drank enough fluids. Belle even seemed to sense something was wrong, moving closer to where Thomas lay and occasionally nuzzling his shoulder. By the second day of his illness, the fever had broken, but Thomas was still weak. Ayanna continued to care for him, and in his recovering state he found himself talking more openly than he ever had with anyone. Can I tell you about my wife? He asked as they sat by the fire, him wrapped in blankets and her keeping watch over both him and their small world. If you want to, Ayanna said gently. Her name was Catherine. She had the most beautiful red hair and she laughed at everything, even my terrible jokes. Thomas smiled at the memory. She came west with her family when she was 16. Most girls that age were afraid of the frontier, but not Catherine. She saw it as an adventure. Ayanna listened without interrupting, sensing that Thomas needed to tell this story. We met at a church social in town. She was wearing a blue dress with little white flowers on it, and she was trying to organize a group of children for some game. She was so patient with them, so kind. I knew right then that I wanted to marry her. How long were you married? Ayanna asked. 5 years. Best 5 years of my life. She could do anything. Cook, sew, help with the ranch work, fix anything that broke. But what I loved most was how she made me laugh. Even when things were hard, she could find something to smile about. Thomas paused, his voice growing thick with emotion. When she got pregnant, she was so excited. She'd already picked out names, made plans for the nursery. She said she wanted at least 4 children so they'd never be lonely. What happened? Ayanna asked softly. The birth went wrong. The baby came too early and there were complications. The doctor tried everything, but Thomas had to stop for a moment. I lost them both. Wife and baby. In one terrible night, my whole future just disappeared. Ayanna reached over and placed her hand on his arm. I am sorry. That is a very hard thing to carry. The worst part was afterward. People kept telling me I was young, that I'd find someone else, that I'd have other children. They meant well, but they didn't understand. I didn't want someone else. I wanted Catherine. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire. Finally, Ayanna began to tell her own story in more detail. My husband's name was Nalnish. It means he works hard in our language. And he did work hard every day to take care of our family. He was the best hunter in our band, could track anything, but he was also gentle. Never raised his voice, never lost his temper. How did you meet him? Our families arranged it when we were young, but we were lucky. We liked each other right away. He had kind eyes and strong hands, and he made me feel safe. Ayanna's voice grew warm with memory. We had 3 years together before our son was born. Tell me about your son. Ayanna's face lit up. Key was his name. Means shoes because he was always running everywhere, wearing out his moccasins. He was 5 when it happened. He loved horses, just like his father. Elnish was teaching him to ride, to track, to be a man. She pulled a small object from her pouch, a tiny carved horse worn smooth by handling. Nalnish made this for Key's 4th birthday. I keep it with me always. Thomas examined the little horse, marveling at the intricate detail. He was very skilled. Yes, he could make anything with his hands. Our house, furniture, tools, toys for Key. He said when Key was older, he would teach him to carve too. What happened that day? Thomas asked gently. Ayana's expression grew dark. Soldiers came to our camp. They said someone had reported that we were hiding warriors who had raided a settlement. It was not true. We were a peaceful band, mostly families with children. But the soldiers did not want to listen. She stared into the fire, reliving the painful memory. They told all the men to come out of their houses with their hands up. Nalnish did as they said, but he told me and Key to stay inside. Then something went wrong. Someone got scared, maybe a soldier, maybe one of our men. Shooting started. Thomas could see the pain in her eyes and wished he could take it away. Nalnish saw a soldier pointing his gun toward our house, toward where Key and I were hiding. He threw himself between the gun and us. The bullet meant for us killed him instead. Then more shooting, and somehow Key ran outside. He was looking for his father, calling for him. Another bullet. Ayana couldn't finish. She didn't need to. Thomas understood the horror of losing a child, even though his own loss had been different. After that, Ayana continued when she could speak again, some of my people said my family was cursed, that the spirits had turned against us. Others blamed me for bringing bad luck to the band, so I left. I could not stay where my husband and son died, could not face the people who looked at me with fear. Where were you going when the storm hit? I was trying to find my grandmother. She lives with my cousin's family now, far to the south, but I am not sure they will want me either. The curse, it follows me. Thomas leaned forward, his voice firm despite his weakness. Ayana, listen to me. You are not cursed. What happened to your family was terrible, but it was not your fault. Sometimes evil things happen to good people and there's no reason for it. You really believe this? Yes. I've learned that if we blame ourselves for things beyond our control, we'll go crazy with guilt. Your husband died protecting you and your son. That's what good men do. And your boy died because he loved his father and wanted to help him. Neither of those things happened because you brought bad luck. Tears ran down Ayana's face, but she nodded. In my heart, I know you are right. But when everyone tells you something is your fault, then everyone is wrong. Thomas reached out and took her hand. You're one of the strongest, kindest people I've ever met. Any curse that could touch you would have to go through me first. The simple declaration seemed to break something loose inside Ayana. She cried then, really cried, for the first time since losing her family. Thomas held her hand and let her grieve, understanding that sometimes you had to let the pain out before you could start to heal. As the evening wore on, their conversation turned to lighter things. They talked about their hopes, their dreams, the things that had made them happy before tragedy struck. By the time they settled in for the night, both felt as if they'd shared something precious, not just their stories, but their trust. The storm was finally beginning to ease outside, but neither of them mentioned it. For now, this cave was their whole world, and they were content to let it remain that way a little longer. Dawn on the 5th day brought something neither Thomas nor Ayana had seen since entering the cave: clear blue sky. The storm had finally passed completely, leaving behind a world transformed by pristine white snow. Sunlight streamed through, the cave entrance making the icicles hanging there sparkle like diamonds. Thomas stood at the entrance, breathing in the crisp, clean air. His fever had broken completely, and though he was still a bit weak, he felt almost human again. Behind him, Ayana was quietly packing her few belongings into her leather pouches. It's beautiful out there, Thomas said, but his voice lacked enthusiasm. The clearing sky meant they could travel again, which meant their time together was coming to an end. Yes, Ayana replied softly. Very beautiful. They both knew what this moment meant, but neither wanted to be the first to say it. Over the past 5 days, they had created their own little world in this cave. A place where the outside conflicts and differences didn't matter, where they could simply be two people who understood each other's pain and found comfort in each other's company. Thomas turned back into the cave and began gathering his own supplies. Belle sensed the change in mood and whinnied softly, as if she too was reluctant to leave their shelter. Where will you go? Thomas asked as he rolled up his bedding. South, to find my grandmother. And you? Back to my ranch in Colorado. Need to see what damage the storm caused, check on the cattle. Thomas paused in his packing. What about the men who stole my horses? I suppose the trail is completely cold now. Maybe that is for the best, Ayanna said. Some things are meant to be let go. Thomas considered this. 5 days ago, those stolen horses had been the most important thing in his world. Now they seemed almost insignificant compared to what he was about to lose. They worked in silence for a while, both moving more slowly than necessary. The practical preparations for leaving couldn't be delayed forever, but they could be drawn out. Ayanna, Thomas said finally, I want you to know that these days. They've meant everything to me. I came into this cave a broken man, and somehow you've helped put me back together. She looked up from where she was carefully arranging her medicine plants. You did same for me. When I came here, I thought maybe I would just keep walking into the snow and not come back. But talking with you, sharing stories, it reminded me that life can still have good things. The honesty of her words hit Thomas like a physical blow. The thought that she might have given up entirely if they hadn't found each other in this cave was almost too painful to bear. Promise me something, he said urgently. Promise me you won't give up. Whatever happens, wherever you go, promise me you'll keep fighting. I promise, she said solemnly, but only if you promise the same thing. I promise. They finished packing their belongings, each item stored away feeling like another step toward an inevitable goodbye. Thomas saddled Belle, checking her gear with extra care. The mare had weathered the storm well and seemed eager to be moving again. As they prepared to step outside together for the last time, Thomas felt something building in his chest, a desperate need to do something, say something that would make this parting meaningful. Wait, he said suddenly. I want to give you something. He pulled out his knife and went to a piece of dead wood near the cave entrance. Working quickly but carefully, he carved a small figure, a horse, running with its mane and tail flowing in the wind. It wasn't as skillfully made as the toy horse Ayanna's husband had carved for their son, but it was made with love and care. I'm not much of a carver, Thomas said, offering her the wooden horse. But I wanted you to have something to remember these days by. Ayanna accepted the gift with tears in her eyes. She traced the simple lines of the horse with her finger, clearly moved by the gesture. It is beautiful. I will treasure it always. She reached into her own pouch and pulled out a small beaded medallion. This was my grandmother's. She gave it to me when I married Nalnish. It is for protection for finding your way home when you are lost. Thomas took the medallion carefully. The beadwork was intricate and beautiful, done in blues and whites that reminded him of sky and snow. I can't take something so precious. This should stay in your family. You are my family now, Ayanna said simply. The family of the heart, not of blood. Please take it. Thomas slipped the medallion into his shirt, where it rested warm against his chest. Thank you. I'll wear it always. They stepped outside together, squinting in the brilliant sunlight reflecting off the snow. The world was indeed transformed, everything familiar made new by the white blanket that covered the landscape. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional crack of a tree branch heavy with snow. Which way will you go? Thomas asked, though he dreaded the answer. Ayanna pointed south, toward a gap between two distant peaks. That way leads to the valley where my cousin lives. It will take many days, but the traveling should be easier now that the storm has passed. Thomas looked north toward the route that would take him back to Colorado and his ranch. The two directions were almost exactly opposite, as if the world was determined to pull them as far apart as possible. Ayanna, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I wish things were different. I wish we lived in a world where two people like us could. I know, she said softly. I wish it too. They stood there for a long moment, neither willing to take the first step that would begin their separation. The sun climbed higher and the snow began to glisten with melting in the warmth. We should go, Ayanna said finally. The traveling will be hard. and we need to cover ground while the weather is good." Thomas nodded, knowing she was right, but hating it anyway. "Will you? Do you think we'll ever see each other again?" Ayanna looked at him with those dark, serious eyes. "I do not know what the future holds, but I know that somewhere in this big world, there will always be someone who understands your heart. Even if we never meet again, that connection is real. It cannot be broken by distance." Thomas helped her climb onto Belle's back for the short ride to where their paths would diverge. She sat behind him, her arms around his waist, and for a few precious minutes they rode together through the snow-covered landscape. All too soon they reached the place where they had to part, a crossroads where one trail led north and the other south. Thomas brought Belle to a stop and helped Ayanna down. "This is it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes." Ayanna looked up at him, and he could see his own pain reflected in her eyes. "Thomas, whatever happens in your life, remember that you are a good man. Any woman would be lucky to know you. And you are the strongest, most remarkable woman I've ever met. Don't let anyone tell you different." They embraced then, holding each other tightly as if they could somehow store up enough warmth and comfort to last through all the lonely days ahead. Thomas breathed in the scent of her hair, memorizing every detail of this moment. When they finally pulled apart, both had tears on their faces. "Go," Ayanna said, stepping back. "Go quickly before I lose my courage." Thomas mounted Belle and turned her toward the north trail. At the last moment, he looked back to see Ayanna standing in the snow, her hand raised in farewell. The image burned itself into his memory, a lone figure in traditional dress, strong and proud against the white wilderness. He rode hard for the first hour, not trusting himself to look back again. When he finally stopped to rest Belle, the crossroads was long out of sight. He was alone again, just as he had been for the past 2 years. But somehow this loneliness felt different. It still hurt, but it wasn't the hopeless emptiness he'd carried before. Ayanna had shown him that it was possible to connect with another person again, to care and be cared for. Even if they never saw each other again, that knowledge was a gift he would carry with him always. As he continued north toward his ranch and his old life, Thomas touched the beaded medallion over his heart. Somewhere to the south, Ayanna was walking toward her own uncertain future, carrying the small wooden horse he had made for her. 2 paths diverging in a snow-covered wilderness, but 2 hearts that would remain forever connected by 5 extraordinary days when a storm had brought them together in a cave and changed both of their lives forever. 3 months after leaving the cave, Thomas stood on the porch of his ranch house watching the sunset paint the Colorado mountains in shades of gold and pink. The snow had long since melted, revealing the green pastures where his cattle grazed peacefully. To any observer, it would have seemed like he had everything a man could want: a successful ranch, healthy animals, and a comfortable home. But Thomas felt more restless than he had in years. He touched the beaded medallion that still hung around his neck, hidden beneath his work shirt. Not a day had passed without him thinking about Ayanna, wondering where she was, whether she had found her grandmother safely, whether she was happy. The routine of ranch life that had once given him purpose now felt hollow and meaningless. His neighbor Joe Martinez had noticed the change. "You seem different since you got back from that horse hunting trip," Joe said one afternoon as they repaired fence together. "More distracted." "Did you ever find those thieves?" "No," Thomas replied, which was true. He'd given up the chase when the storm hit and never resumed it. Decided it wasn't worth the trouble. Joe looked at him strangely. The old Thomas would never have let horse thieves get away. He'd been known throughout the territory as a man who didn't back down from anything. "You feeling all right, Thomas? You've been acting strange for months now." Thomas forced a smile. "Just tired, I guess. Ranch work takes it out of a man." But it wasn't tiredness that kept him awake at night. It was the memory of dark eyes and gentle hands, of stories told by firelight and the feeling that he'd found something precious only to lose it again. Every morning he woke hoping that today would be the day he stopped thinking about her constantly. Every night he went to bed disappointed. He'd tried to throw himself into his work thinking that physical exhaustion would quiet his restless mind. He'd built new corrals, repaired every building on the ranch twice, and worked his cattle until they were in the best condition they'd ever been. Nothing helped. The worst part was going to town. People there had started trying to introduce him to eligible women again, sensing that something had changed in him. The widow, Mrs. Patterson, had invited him to dinner several times. The schoolteacher, Miss Johnson, had made it clear she would welcome his attention. They were both fine women who would have made good wives for any sensible rancher, but Thomas couldn't bring himself to feel anything for them. Compared to Ayanna's depth and strength, they seemed pale and insubstantial. He found himself making excuses to avoid social gatherings, preferring the solitude of his ranch to the well-meaning matchmaking efforts of the townspeople. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles to the south, Ayanna was struggling with her own demons. She had found her grandmother's camp after a difficult 2-week journey through the mountains. The reunion had been bittersweet. Her grandmother, now bent with age but still sharp-minded, had welcomed her with tears of joy. "My child," the old woman had whispered, holding Ayanna close. "I thought I would never see you again." Ayanna's cousin's family had been kind enough, making room for her in their wickiup and sharing their food. But she could see the wariness in some of their eyes. The story of her family's tragedy had reached them, along with the whispers about bad spirits and curses. "Some of the people are afraid," her cousin's wife had explained gently. "They worry that the bad luck might spread to our family too." Ayanna tried to fit in, to be helpful and unobtrusive. She gathered food, tended the fires, and helped care for the children. But she felt like a ghost haunting the edges of other people's lives. The easy acceptance and understanding she'd found with Thomas in the cave seemed like a dream from another lifetime. Her grandmother, wise in the ways of reading hearts, noticed her granddaughter's sadness. "You are not the same girl who left us," she observed one evening as they sat together outside the camp. "Many things have changed." "Grandmother, tell me about the white man." Ayanna looked at her in surprise. She hadn't mentioned Thomas to anyone. The old woman smiled. "You touch something at your neck when you think no one is watching. And your eyes. They look toward the north when you believe yourself alone. There was a man, yes?" Unable to hide anything from her grandmother's sharp gaze, Ayanna told her the whole story. She spoke of the storm, the cave, the 5 days that had changed everything about how she saw the world. Her grandmother listened without judgment, nodding occasionally. "He was kind to you," the old woman said when Ayanna finished. "Very kind. And respectful. He treated me like a person who mattered. And you loved him?" It wasn't a question. Ayanna considered denying it, but what was the point? "Yes, I think I did. But it is impossible, grandmother. Our worlds are too different, are they? From what you tell me, he showed you the same grief and loneliness that you carry. Pain is the same in every heart, granddaughter. So is love." That night, Ayanna lay on her sleeping mat staring up at the stars, thinking about her grandmother's words. She pulled out the small wooden horse Thomas had carved for her, running her fingers over its simple lines. In the darkness, she could almost hear his voice, feel the warmth of the cave fire, remember the safety she'd felt in his presence. Spring turned to summer, and both Thomas and Ayanna tried to build new lives from the pieces of their old ones. Thomas hired extra help for the ranch and began taking trips to other towns, hoping that a change of scenery might ease his restlessness. Ayanna learned that her cousin's band would be relocating to the reservation soon, and she was expected to go with them. The thought of life on the reservation filled her with dread. She'd heard the stories from other tribes: overcrowding, poor food, government officials who treated the people like children. It would mean giving up the last of her freedom, the last connection to the traditional ways her grandmother had taught her. But what choice did she have? A woman alone in the world had few options, especially an Apache woman in 1888. She could stay with her cousin's family and accept whatever fate awaited them on the reservation, or she could strike out on her own again and face the dangers of a hostile world. As summer progressed, Thomas found himself riding farther and farther from his ranch, always heading south. He told himself he was looking for new markets for his cattle, scouting new grazing land, checking on old friends. But in his heart, he knew he was searching for something else entirely. One evening, while camped near a stream about 2 days' ride from his ranch, Thomas made a decision that surprised even him. He would sell the ranch and go looking for Ayanna. The life he'd built in Colorado felt empty without her, and he could no longer pretend that he'd be content to live out his days wondering what might have been. It was a crazy idea, and he knew it. He had no idea where to start looking for her, no guarantee that she'd want to see him even if he found her. But the alternative, spending the rest of his life going through the motions of living without really feeling alive, was unacceptable. At almost the same moment, hundreds of miles away, Ayanna was coming to her own life-changing decision. As she watched her cousin's family packing their belongings for the move to the reservation, she realized she couldn't go with them. Not yet. Not without at least trying to find the man who had shown her that love and understanding were still possible. "I cannot go with you," she told her cousin one evening. "I have something I must do first." Her cousin looked worried. "Ayanna, it is dangerous for a woman to travel alone." "And where would you go?" "North," Ayanna said simply. "I have to go north." Her grandmother, who had been listening from her place by the fire, nodded slowly. "Sometimes the heart knows things the mind cannot understand. If you must go, child, then go. But be careful." "What if I cannot find him, grandmother? What if he has forgotten me?" The old woman smiled. "A man does not forget a woman who helps him find his heart again. And if the spirits mean for you to be together, they will guide your paths to cross again." That night, Ayanna began her own preparations for a journey. She gathered supplies, planned her route, and tried to prepare herself for the possibility that she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. But as she held the wooden horse Thomas had carved for her, she knew she had to try. Somewhere to the north, a lonely rancher was making his own desperate plans. Somewhere to the south, a brave woman was preparing to risk everything for love. Neither knew that the other was also planning a journey. But both felt the same pull, an invisible thread connecting two hearts across the vast wilderness. The question was whether that thread would be strong enough to bring them together again, or whether they were destined to search for each other forever without ever meeting. The August sun was merciless as Ayanna stumbled toward the well behind Thomas's ranch house. She had been traveling for 8 days through some of the harshest country she'd ever crossed, following half-remembered landmarks in the faint hope that she could find the ranch of a man whose last name she'd never even learned. Her water had run out 2 days ago. Her food was long gone. The horse she'd borrowed from her cousin had gone lame, and she'd had to set it free rather than watch it suffer. For the past day and a half, she'd been walking, driven forward only by a desperate determination that had kept her moving when her body wanted to collapse. When she finally saw the wooden buildings and corrals of a ranch in the distance, she wasn't even sure it was the right place. But it had to be. She had no strength left to search further. Ayanna made it as far as the well before her legs gave out completely. She collapsed beside it, her vision blurring from heat and exhaustion. The last thing she saw before unconsciousness claimed her was a pair of worn leather boots running toward her. Thomas had been mending fence when he spotted the figure approaching his ranch. Something about the way the person moved, a distinctive, graceful walk even in obvious distress, made his heart skip a beat. But it couldn't be. His mind was playing tricks on him, seeing what he wanted to see instead of what was really there. Then the figure collapsed by his well, and Thomas was running faster than he'd run since he was a boy. Even from a distance, even changed by travel and hardship, he knew those features, that long black hair. "Ayanna," he whispered as he dropped to his knees beside her unconscious form. "What are you doing here?" He carried her into the house, laying her gently on his bed and covering her with cool, damp cloths. She was burning with fever, dehydrated and exhausted. For the next 3 days, Thomas barely left her side, feeding her small sips of water, broth, and medicine, just as she had cared for him in the cave. When Ayanna finally opened her eyes on the 4th morning, the first thing she saw was Thomas's worried face looking down at her. "You found me," she whispered, her voice hoarse but filled with wonder. "Actually, you found me," Thomas said, his relief evident in every word. "What were you thinking traveling all this way alone? You could have died out there." "I had to find you," Ayanna said simply. "I could not live without knowing if what we shared was real." Thomas took her hand gently. "It was real. It is real. I've been going crazy these past months, thinking about you every day, wishing I'd never let you go. You were going to come looking for me. I was planning to sell the ranch and head south next month. I couldn't stand the thought of never seeing you again." They looked at each other in amazement, both realizing how close they'd come to missing each other entirely. If Ayanna had arrived a month later, Thomas would have been gone. If Thomas had left a week earlier, he would have missed her arrival. For the next week, Thomas nursed Ayana back to health while they talked about everything that had happened since they'd parted. They shared their struggles, their loneliness, and their growing certainty that they belonged together despite all the obstacles in their way. "I love you," Thomas said one evening as they sat on his porch watching the sunset. "I know it's complicated, I know there will be problems, but I love you and I want you to stay." "I love you too," Ayana replied. "But Thomas, you know what this means. The world will not accept us. Your neighbors, the government, my people. They will all have something to say about this. Then we'll face it together. I'm tired of living my life based on what other people think." Their happiness lasted exactly 9 days. On a Tuesday morning in late August, 6 armed men rode up to Thomas's ranch. Thomas recognized most of them. Local ranchers and townspeople who'd grown suspicious of the Indian woman they'd heard was staying at his place. The leader was Bill Henderson, a man who owned the neighboring ranch and had never liked Thomas much anyway. Behind him rode the town sheriff, Deputy Morrison, and 4 other men Thomas knew by sight. "Morning, Thomas," Henderson said, not bothering to dismount. "We need to talk." Thomas stepped out onto his porch, positioning himself between the men and his front door. Ayana was inside, but he could feel her presence near the window, listening to every word. "What can I do for you, gentlemen?" Thomas asked, keeping his voice calm despite the anger building in his chest. "You can start by explaining why you're harboring a hostile Indian on your property," Henderson said bluntly. "Word is you've got an Apache woman living here. That true?" "What I do on my own land is my business, Bill. Not when it affects the safety of the whole community," Deputy Morrison spoke up. "We've had reports of Apache raiders in the area. For all we know, this woman is a spy, gathering information for another attack." Thomas almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Ayana, who couldn't hurt a fly, being accused of spying for raiders. "That's ridiculous, and you know it, is it?" Henderson's voice grew harder. "How well do you really know this woman, Thomas? You find her wandering around in the wilderness and suddenly she's living in your house. How do you know she's not gathering information about our ranches, our defenses?" "Because I know her," Thomas said firmly. "She's not a spy or a raider. She's a woman who lost her family and needed help." "That's what she told you," said another man, Jim Walsh from town. "But how do you know it's true? These people lie as easy as breathing." The casual racism in that statement made Thomas's blood boil, but he forced himself to stay calm. Getting angry would only make things worse. "She's not going anywhere," Thomas said quietly, "and neither am I." "Thomas, be reasonable," the sheriff said, trying to sound diplomatic. "The territorial government has strict policies about harboring Apache. You could get in serious trouble for this. Why don't you just turn her over to us? We'll make sure she gets to the reservation where she belongs." "No." The simple word hung in the air like a challenge. The men shifted in their saddles, hands moving closer to their weapons. "You're making a big mistake, McKenna," Henderson said. "This woman isn't worth throwing your life away for." "That's where you're wrong," Thomas replied. "She's worth everything to me." "Then you're a bigger fool than I thought. Boys, I think we need to take matters into our own hands." The men began to dismount, clearly intending to force their way into the house. Thomas stepped down from the porch, his hand resting on his rifle. "The first man who steps foot on my property uninvited is going to have a problem," Thomas said, his voice deadly calm. For a moment it looked like violence was inevitable. 6 armed men against 1, and everyone knew Thomas was outnumbered. But just as Henderson started to draw his gun, the sound of hoofbeats interrupted the tense standoff. Riding up the ranch road came an unexpected figure, Father Martinez, the Catholic priest from town. The elderly Mexican man had married Thomas's parents and baptized half the children in the county. His presence changed the entire dynamic of the confrontation. "What is happening here?" Father Martinez asked as he dismounted from his horse, his voice carrying the authority of his position. "Just handling some business, Father," Henderson said, suddenly looking less confident. "Nothing for you to worry about." "When 6 armed men surround one man's home, it becomes something I worry about very much," the priest replied sternly. He looked at Thomas with kind eyes. "I heard rumors in town and came to see for myself. Is it true you are caring for a woman in need?" "Yes, Father." "Her name is Ayana. She's very important to me." Father Martinez nodded slowly. "And is this woman a threat to the community?" "No, Father. She's the gentlest person I've ever known." The priest turned to face the group of armed men. Then I see no reason for this gathering. Charity and compassion are Christian virtues, are they not? If Mr. McKenna wishes to help a woman in need, that seems to me like following Christ's teachings. Henderson's face reddened. Father, with all due respect, this isn't just about charity. This is about an Apache living among white folks. It's not natural. What is not natural, Father Martinez said with quiet authority, is turning away from someone who needs help because of the color of their skin. I have met this woman. She helped tend to sick children in town just last week. She showed nothing but kindness and skill. Thomas felt a surge of gratitude toward the priest. He hadn't known about Ayanna helping in town, but it didn't surprise him. Father, Deputy Morrison said uncomfortably, there are laws about this kind of thing, territorial regulations about Apache placement. And there are higher laws about treating all people with dignity and respect, the priest replied. Unless this woman has committed a crime, I see no reason to disturb her peace. The standoff continued for several more tense minutes, but Father Martinez's presence had taken the wind out of the vigilante's sails. It was one thing to threaten a lone rancher, quite another to go against the town's respected priest. Finally, Henderson remounted his horse with obvious reluctance. This isn't over, McKenna. There are others who won't be as patient as we've been. I'll be ready for them, Thomas replied. As the men rode away, Father Martinez approached Thomas. My son, I hope you understand the seriousness of your situation. There are those who will not be easily discouraged. I understand, Father, but I can't send her away. I love her. The attack came at dawn, just as Thomas was heading out to check on his cattle. He spotted the dust cloud first, too many riders approaching too fast for it to be anything friendly. 8 men this time, more than had come before, and they weren't coming to talk. Ayanna, Thomas shouted as he ran back toward the house. Get inside and stay down. She was already at the window, having heard the approaching hoofbeats. How many? Too many. But we're not giving up. Thomas grabbed his rifle and positioned himself on the porch while Ayanna took cover inside the house with the pistol he'd taught her to use. The riders pulled up just outside the ranch yard, spreading out in a semicircle that effectively trapped the house. Bill Henderson was there again, but this time he'd brought reinforcements. Men Thomas didn't recognize. Rough-looking types who probably weren't too concerned about the law. The kind of men who might shoot first and ask questions later. Last chance, McKenna, Henderson shouted. Send the squaw out and we'll let you live. The slur hit Thomas like a physical blow. He'd never been a man given to violence, but the disrespect shown to Ayanna made his blood boil. Her name is Ayanna, Thomas called back, his rifle aimed at Henderson's chest, and the only way you're getting to her is through me. Have it your way, Henderson replied. He turned to his men. Boys, looks like we're going to have to do this the hard way. What happened next would be talked about in the territory for years to come. As the men began to advance on the house, Thomas stepped down from the porch with his rifle raised, a lone figure facing impossible odds. He was outnumbered 8-1, and everyone there knew it. That's when salvation came from the most unexpected direction. Stop right there. The voice cut through the morning air like a sword. Everyone turned to see a lone rider approaching from the east, an elderly Apache woman mounted on a paint horse, riding with the straight-backed dignity of someone who had never bowed to anyone. It was Ayanna's grandmother. The old woman rode directly into the middle of the standoff. Seemingly unconcerned by the guns pointed in her direction, she dismounted slowly and walked toward the house, her weathered face showing no fear. Grandmother, Ayanna called from the doorway, her voice filled with shock and joy. I have come to see this man who has captured my granddaughter's heart, the old woman said in perfect English, her voice carrying surprising strength. Henderson was clearly flustered by this development. Ma'am, this doesn't concern you. We're dealing with a problem here. The old woman looked at him with eyes that had seen decades of conflict and survival. A problem? I see a man protecting the woman he loves. Where I come from, we call that honor. You don't understand, Deputy Morrison spoke up. This situation is complicated. There are laws. I understand perfectly, the grandmother interrupted. I understand that you are afraid of something you do not know. My granddaughter is not your enemy. She seeks only peace and love. Thomas was amazed by the old woman's courage. Here she was, one elderly Apache woman facing down 8 armed white men, and she showed no fear whatsoever. Please, the grandmother continued. Let me tell you about my granddaughter. She lost her husband and child to violence. She has known enough pain for 10 lifetimes. This man," she gestured toward Thomas, "has given her hope again. Why would you want to destroy that?" For a moment the tension seemed to ease slightly. The old woman's dignity and obvious sincerity had an effect on some of the men. But Henderson wasn't ready to back down. "It doesn't matter what kind of person she is," he said harshly. "She's Apache and she doesn't belong here. This is white man's country now." "This is everyone's country," said a new voice. Father Martinez was riding up the ranch road, but he wasn't alone. Behind him came Joe Martinez, Thomas's neighbor, along with Dr. Peterson from town and surprisingly the town's mayor, Samuel Brooks. "What's the meaning of this gathering?" Mayor Brooks demanded as he dismounted from his horse. Henderson shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. The mayor's presence complicated things considerably. "We're handling a situation that threatens the community, Sam. This rancher is harboring a hostile Indian." "Hostile?" Dr. Peterson stepped forward. "The woman you're talking about spent 3 days helping me tend to sick children during the fever outbreak last month. She knew more about healing herbs than I did. If that's hostile, we need more hostility in this town." Thomas felt his heart swell with pride. He'd known Ayanna had been helping people in town, but he hadn't realized how much good she'd been doing. Joe Martinez nodded in agreement. "My wife was having trouble with her pregnancy. This Apache woman, Ayanna, she came and helped when the doctor was out of town, saved my wife and baby both. My family owes her everything." Mayor Brooks looked around at the armed men with obvious disapproval. "So let me understand this. You're threatening to harm a woman who has been helping our community, a woman who has done nothing but good since she arrived? It doesn't matter what she's done," Henderson insisted. But his voice lacked the conviction it had held before. The law says a lot of things," Father Martinez interrupted. "But sometimes we must choose between the letter of the law and the spirit of justice. This woman has proven herself to be a blessing to our community." Ayanna's grandmother stepped forward again. "I have a proposal," she said, her voice carrying the authority of age and wisdom. "Let me speak for my granddaughter and this man who loves her." She turned to address the crowd that had now gathered. "In my tribe, when two people wish to join their lives, both families must agree. Today I speak for Ayanna's family. I have watched this man, Thomas McKenna. I have seen how he treats my granddaughter with respect and tenderness. I have seen how he protects her when others would do her harm." The old woman paused, letting her words sink in. "Love is rare in this world. Love that crosses the barriers people build between themselves is even rarer. Why would you want to destroy something so precious?" Thomas felt moved beyond words. He had never expected to receive such support from Ayanna's family, and the old woman's acceptance meant more to him than he could express. "Furthermore," the grandmother continued, "I propose that this union be blessed in the way of both our peoples. Let Father Martinez perform a Christian ceremony, and let me perform the Apache blessing. Let this marriage be a bridge between our worlds instead of a source of conflict." Mayor Brooks stepped forward. "That's actually not a bad idea. Thomas McKenna is a respected member of this community. He pays his taxes, helps his neighbors, and runs an honest business. If he chooses to marry this woman and she has proven herself to be a benefit to our town, I see no reason to object." Henderson was growing desperate. "You're all making a mistake. You can't trust these people. Today it's one woman. Tomorrow it could be a whole war party. The only person making threats here today is you, Bill," Joe Martinez said firmly. "Thomas has been my neighbor for 5 years. He's helped me through droughts, lent me cattle when mine were sick, and never asked for anything in return. If he says this woman is good, that's enough for me." Dr. Peterson nodded, "And I can attest to her medical knowledge and compassion. She has skills that could benefit our entire community." The tide was clearly turning. Henderson looked around and realized that his support was melting away. The men he'd brought with him were shifting nervously, no longer sure they were on the right side of this fight. "This isn't over," Henderson said. But his words carried no real threat now. "There are others who won't be as understanding." "Then they'll have to deal with all of us," Mayor Brooks said firmly. "This community protects its own, and from what I've heard today, Ayanna McKenna will be one of our own very soon." As Henderson and his remaining supporters rode away, defeated and angry, the remaining crowd began to take on a celebratory atmosphere. What had started as a confrontation was turning into an impromptu wedding planning session. Father Martinez approached Thomas and Ayanna, who had emerged from the house to stand beside her grandmother. "If you truly wish to marry, I would be honored to perform the ceremony," he said. "It would be my pleasure to bless this union," Ayana's grandmother smiled. "And I will prepare the Apache ceremonies. We will show this community that love knows no boundaries." Thomas looked at Ayana, hardly believing how dramatically their situation had changed. "What do you say? Will you marry me? Officially this time?" Ayana's eyes filled with tears of joy. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The wedding took place 2 weeks later in a ceremony that was unlike anything the territory had ever seen. Father Martinez performed the Christian service in the town church, while Ayana's grandmother conducted traditional Apache blessings afterward in the meadow behind Thomas's ranch. The entire community turned out for the celebration. People who had never seen an Apache ceremony watched in fascination as the grandmother burned sacred herbs and chanted ancient blessings for fertility, happiness, and long life. Ayana wore a white dress that the women of the town had helped her make, but she also wore traditional Apache jewelry that her grandmother had brought. Thomas stood beside his bride, overwhelmed by the support they had received from unexpected quarters. The beaded medallion Ayana had given him in the cave hung proudly around his neck, no longer hidden beneath his shirt.